Hey everybody, Brandon here coming to you today on the channel. This is going to be a full-length walkthrough video this time on a baby giraffe. This is part of a three-part series of baby animals that I did on a commission request. So we did a baby elephant prior that's already on the channel that is a quicker time-lapsed kind of walkthrough video. So this one is going to be for those folks that want the full length so you can paint along, see my process for this one. Then I have a baby lion cub coming out later as well. So if you want to check this video out, let's go have a look at that one now.
All right, here on the canvas, I have a pencil sketch here of my baby giraffe. I'm going to start here with a small 1/8" flat brush. I'm going to start with this small brush here because I'm going to actually start here around these eyes. I want to put some just dark color in around the eyes, define those out first, and then move on to the rest of the face. So I'm going to start here with black, tiny little touch of blue, very small amount of titanium white, but mostly black, a little bit of blue. I'm going to come in here and define out the shape of these eyes with this dark color first, and then we'll come back in and put the highlights around the edges to define out the shape. When I'm working with acrylics though, I always go, personally anyway, dark first and then put my light highlights in over it. So right now this is just about blocking in some dark color here and defining these out. And then ultimately I will come in here and work the rest of the painting the same way, putting my dark colors in, especially on where my pencil sketch is, so I can preserve most of what I have sketched in. So again here, just get this dark color in first, and we'll come back in with our highlights. I'm going to start to lighten this area up in here now. Just added a touch more titanium white to my mix, graying it out a little bit. We'll start to define out the curvature here of the top of the eye. We'll essentially do this along the top and the bottom. I've switched brushes here to a little spotter brush here. I'm a little more white in the mix now, brightening it up even more. Creating these areas of highlight here. Extend out these eyelashes. A little bit of the smaller detail work here in the corners. Now back to my small little flat brush here. Let's switch colors now to this kind of creamy yellow color. Get a little bit of color on canvas here below the eyes. I'm going to move into my little bit darker, this is like some burnt sienna, tiny touch of red here. start to put in some of this darker color in these areas. Really just following my pencil sketch here. Making sure I define out my areas that I have sketched in. Get this dark color down first. And really working with this color. I just have a couple different mixes here on my makeshift palette here, so lights and darks that I can jump back and forth in between to get the right shading in the areas that I want it in. I want to try to preserve as much of my pencil sketch as I can as I'm putting these lights and darks in, so I know what goes where. And really where I've scribbled in the pencil is the darker areas, so I'll work around it here with a little bit of lighter color while I have that on my brush, and then I can drop in here now and put the darker stuff back in. This is essentially what I would do if I were creating my original sketch, but doing it with the paintbrush and the paints as opposed to doing it with the pencil. So that's really all I'm doing now, is kind of transferring my pencil sketch into color, making sure I have darks where they're supposed to be and highlights where they're supposed to be, and then we'll go back and fill in the rest. So you see when I have dark color here on my brush, I'm just going to scribble this in basically where I have scrubbed in my dark areas of the pencil. And this particular painting is mostly going to be facial detail too, by the way. So the bulk of the time of this painting is going to be spent here on the face. The neck will be like the last thing we do, neck and shoulder, and that part will actually go pretty quickly. Not quite as much detail work to be done on the neck and shoulder area, so that'll just be basically laying some color in. We'll switch over to a 1/2 inch angle brush now just to cover a little more territory. It's got a nice tip to it though, so I can still basically scrub in what is fur or hair detail here with this tip. So you'll notice I'll just turn it here and small brush strokes kind of in the direction that the hair on this face on the top of the head here is laying. And depending here how I turn this brush, I can create a variety of brush strokes and effects with it, which makes this angled brush pretty nice piece to use. A nice pointed tip on here allows me to get this brush in and around some pretty tight areas, but I can still use this brush to cover a lot of area and hold more paint than the smaller ones. So once I want to start getting more color on the canvas faster, I use this slightly larger angled brush here. Just finishing out the basic shape here of the top of the head. I'm basically just putting in contrasting colors here. We'll ultimately come back in and try to create a couple of creases along the forehead, etc. Really, this is just a matter of shading to create shape. So I'm going to come in here and start putting in a little bit of my lighter color. So really, when I want to lighten the mix up, I will add maybe unbleached titanium is a good one. You can use obviously a touch of titanium white, depending on what your colors are. If you already have a mix of some kind of a lighter brown or a tan, anything works when you're basically going back and forth between darks and lights, trying to create some contrast here on the canvas to create shape of the face. So don't be afraid to go back and forth at this point. So you can put a little bit of light in, and if you get a little too much, you can come back in and darken it back up. Create these contour lines in these areas. So trying to define out like these areas here along the sides of the nose, coming back to the eye. And you'll see me hop around a little bit just based on the color I currently have on the brush. If I know there's another area here that's got the same color in it, I may go ahead and move to that spot while I have that color on the brush. Now going back darker again. Let's put in some of these darker areas. Still utilizing the 1/2 inch angled brush here, because again I can flip this around and use the tip to get in a little bit tighter spaces. And now here I can add a little bit of my unbleached titanium again to lighten it up, to again keep basically forming my contour here. And now that I have this color on the brush, I'm going to go ahead and start around these ears, because the bulk of the outer edges of these ears is a lighter, kind of a creamy color. So since I have that now on the brush, I'll move in here and start putting that color in. There's a little bit of darker stuff that will come back kind of in the middle to the inner ear. I can get pretty sharp edges again with this angled brush, especially using the edge of it. So it's good for filling in the outside edges of any areas like this that I want a nice sharp edge. So really just kind of tracing the outer edges of these ears with it. And then I can kind of turn this brush on side to lay in broader strokes of color. I touch just a little bit of water on occasion to make things move around a little better. Now we'll get back into some dark. Scrub in a little bit of these areas in here that will need to be shaded, whatever this is, on the inside of the ear. And again, we'll come back multiple passes in this stuff and blend all this stuff together. I would still consider this to be like a blocking in phase for the most part, so we're not really worried about a ton of detail here yet. I'll come fill in the rest of the ear now. Back with our kind of lighter cream colored mixture here. You make this with a little bit of whatever brown you have, a burnt umber, a burnt sienna, doesn't really matter. A fair bit of titanium white, depending on what brown you're using. Maybe a tiny little touch of red if you need it, or a little bit of yellow if you need it. I'll go ahead and bring this same color now down here onto the face itself, above the eyes. It's always good for continuity when you've painted a big area like these ears with a certain color that you've had mixed on your palette to then bring it down in to the rest of the face here, because you're now introducing the same color, exact same color across the face of an animal like this, which is always a good thing to do, just for some, like I said, some continuity of the hair or the fur or whatever you want to call it. Now I'll dip back into my darker browns again, and then just working back and forth between darks and lights. I'm going to get into a little bit of a redder portion here now, so I'm touching a little bit of red into this mix. Make it a little bit warmer here across the top of the head. And I can just kind of blend this color down as I start to lose it off of the brush. Back to my darker brown. We'll finish touching in some of this stuff along the top of the head. Now with that same thing, I can come back in here, like these areas of the ear, for instance. Anytime I've put a color on the brush that I like the looks of that color for something else on the painting, I will go ahead again and move to it while I still have it on the brush. We'll bring some of this down here, closer to the nose here across the bridge. I'm using little short strokes here, again, kind of in the direction of what the fur would be laying. Kind of hard to maybe see what that's doing on camera, but if you were looking at this painting, in person or up close, those individual brush strokes just kind of add to the fur effect. And once again, I'll run that color off the brush, so I'm going to go back to the palette now, and I think I'm just going to go back into my dark brown again. Go back to some of this stuff on the top of the head. Now I'll just add a couple of shaded areas here across the top of the forehead. Again, we can kind of create some wrinkles that these giraffes usually have kind of across the top, which is some alternating darks and lights there will create that effect. And I can come to find the edges of these ears just a little bit better with the edge of this brush with that darker color on it as well. If my background are really dark, this might not be necessary, but since my background is a fair bit lighter in this sense, it helps to define those edges a little bit with a little darker color. And then here again, as the color's kind of getting taken away off of the brush, I can just kind of scrub in some little areas of fur texture or whatever I want as I'm using up the rest of the paint on the brush. Now we'll go back into some lighter stuff again. Short little brush strokes that are, again, the direction of how this hair is laying down on the inside of these ears. And again, it's just a process back and forth. When I run out of this paint, I'll switch to something else and come back in again. But you can already see our little baby giraffe here starting to take a little bit of shape. Each pass we make with highlights or putting darker areas back in just starts to bring it a little bit more to life. Any place here where you've got an area that the light might be catching a little bit more, you can drop in the lighter highlights. I'm going to switch back to my small little 1/8 inch flat brush here to work in some of these tighter areas of highlight. Depending on where I'm at here in the painting and what I've got going on, I like to alternate my brushes based off of where I need to get the highlights in. So some of this stuff, while I could have kept using the tip of that angled brush, I can work a little faster with this to really get in these tight corners. So a little bit of highlight here. And then I can clean up my darks, like the creases of the eye here. A little bit more on these eyelashes coming out. Now I can move into this mix that I had along the top of the head here with this small brush while I still have it in my hand. Put in some short little textured strokes along the edges of this stuff. This is another one of those deals. It just depends on how detailed you want your painting. Moving back to my 1/2 inch angled brush. Get into some lighter color here to add in some fur highlights again. Let's move inside this ear, around the perimeter and the edges. You know, the ears on these giraffes are kind of cupped, right? So down in the center where it's cupped is where the darker shaded areas are, but along these edges right here where it's attached to the face and along the perimeter it's a little lighter where there's more light hitting. So I'm coming in here and brightening that up. And again, to finish off what's on the brush, I can come in here around the eyes. And then ultimately to clean that up, back to my little small flat brush again, same color. Get in here a little tighter. I like to start on the area where the color needs to be the most saturated, so to speak, and then paint away from that. So as my brush loses the color, it naturally will fade into what else I've already had on the canvas here. So I can move away from the edges of the face into the bridge of the nose here as my brush loses color, and it'll naturally kind of fade into that. Now I can kind of clean up the edges of the rest of the face here while I have the small brush in my hand. So get around the kind of around the chin here, around this. Let's get around these nostrils here a little bit. To find out these nostrils a little bit better, you can again alternate your areas of light and dark around them. And put some darker stuff right next to where it's lighter, and it'll start to shape them out. And I'll continue here with this darker color right along the bottom edges here, and then start to move up the bridge of the nose with it. And I find that I keep my brush strokes just kind of short and choppy with this little brush here. It always looks more realistic in terms of an animal with fur on it. I just vary my color ever so slightly as I'm working through areas like this. So as I'm darker and I need to go into a little bit lighter color, you can just add just a touch of the same value, maybe that's a little bit lighter. Again, you can move into a little bit of an unbleached titanium is good on a project like this with a lot of brown and yellow in it. Cream color. And then a lot of the front end of like this giraffe, for instance, it just looks kind of like dotted almost. So I'm going to take this darker brown here and just kind of blotch in a bunch of dots here along the front of the nose, around the mouth. Same kind of thing down here around the chin a little bit. And then even vary it with some lighter dots down here. So I'll go into my unbleached titanium here and just tap in some lighter stuff down here around the bottom of this chin. A few little places right here in the middle of the front of the mouth. I'm going to switch to a liner brush now. This is a script liner brush. And really what I'm doing here is just creating individual hair basically detail. So hair on the face or fur, whatever you want to call this. So I use a script liner brush. And again, I can vary with lights and darks here and go back and forth with it in all of these areas to really lay in what looks like fine detail. And again, it'll be kind of hard to see some of this through camera. But again, looking at this painting up close or in person, you'll see a lot of individual hair detail by doing this. So laying a lighter color here on top of some of this dark to create some little individual hair detail, and then reverse, get in a dark color and lay it in some of the areas that are already lighter. You do this back and forth a few times until you're happy with your level of detail. And that's what it really boils down to, is how detailed do you want this yourself. Let's get down here now to this neck and trunk area. I'm going to move back to my angled brush here so I can cover some ground. I've got basically a mix here of unbleached titanium, just a tiny touch of brown umber here, a little bit of, and I say a little, tiny little bit of red, and some titanium white, kind of creating this creamier yellow color here. And just work this around everything that's not a dark brown patch anyway to start with. I'm going to move some of the same color with my small flat brush back up here into the face. As I mentioned earlier, it's really good to create some continuity on an animal when you have a very specific color you have mixed up that you've put in somewhere on it, to carry it into the rest of the painting somewhere, just for to tie it all together. So I've gotten this color here I've put on the neck. I'm bringing it up here into the face now. I didn't have that color previously mixed on the palette, so when I mixed it up here to start on the neck, it's a good time now. I can come up here and bring it into multiple areas, so get around the eyes, bring it up here into the ears as well. It really just brings everything together. If I were painting this animal in oil paintings, it's a little bit easier to do because your oil will stay wet obviously a lot longer, so you could mix the color up literally before you even started the entire painting if you had enough of it mixed. Working in acrylics, it's not quite as easy. If you mix up a color, don't have a way to keep it from drying on you, or put in some kind of medium to keep it from drying, you'll end up mixing a color and getting it across half of your painting, and then it dries up on you, and then you have to mix again, and if you don't get it exactly the same, it can make things look a little odd and unusual. So I don't mix in huge batches usually when I'm mixing some paint here on the palette, just a little bit at a time. And then it's a lot easier for me to then come back and bring it across multiple places of the painting, like I said, to tie it all together. We'll move back into our brown mix here and start getting in some of our dark patches here on the neck and shoulder. And really just kind of dropping this color in these areas, basically like puzzle pieces almost. And then we'll come back a couple of times with a little darker and lighter in some areas, just to create a little bit of contour and some highlights. Ultimately, I want to make the area under the chin a little bit darker, kind of like a shadow. And then we'll brighten up a little bit on the top of the neck here and shoulder where some light would be hitting to make it a little brighter. So and then of course they have that fur along the back of the neck that will extend off as well. Now that we've got a bulk of our color in here, I'm going to come in with my small flat brush again just to tighten up some of the edges. I'm also going to come in here and, like I said, darken this area a little bit here under this chin, just because this would probably be shadow a little bit, shaded a little bit here underneath the face. So I don't want this fur in here to be quite as bright. And just basically filling in the rest of my gaps here. That gets us a good place to start. Now I'll come in here again and continue to work a little bit of this shaded area under the chin. So I put just a tiny bit of blue. Maybe even need a very small amount of black in here to kind of gray this out, make it more of a shadow. Bring this in a little bit here on the underside of the curvature of the neck. Just again to create a little bit of shape. So a little bit more shaded under here. And then we'll brighten the top side up before it's all said and done. Just a tiny, tiny bit more blue under here. Trying to create the biggest contrast right there underneath the chin. Now I'm going to brighten up my mix a little bit here to highlight along the back. Added just a tiny bit of that unbleached titanium in here. So we make a little brighter highlights here along the back. And that will fade down in here, and then with our little bit of shaded highlights along the other side of the neck, we can start to create a little bit of contour here on our baby giraffe. Let's come in here now and bring this fur off the back of the neck. I'm going to start with the dark color here right along edge first. Small little brush strokes kind of moving in the direction that the fur is, obviously. Just kind of keeping it random. And then we'll brighten it up along the tips where the light would be really highlighting the edges the most. Now I'm going to come in not quite as dark here. This is more of a burnt sienna. So it's a little redder in value here. Come along the tops of this darker brown and start to extend that fur out just a little bit. Another pass here, just a little brighter yet, even. All right, let's move into script liner brush here to create a little bit of fine hair detail through this. So go into my dark first and draw a little bit of these darker lines out into that lighter outer edge that we just made. My script liner brush is usually one of the last things that I'm doing on animals like this, trying to create that last little bit of individual hair detail, right? So, and again, I can alternate this. I can come in here with these dark lines and then finish up with a little bit of a brighter one. I'm going to put a little bit of this hair detail here on these individual splotches here on the neck as well. Just kind of drawing in some darker lines just to break it up a little bit. And really for this project, this is going to be about as much detail as I've put in. I think we have a pretty decent representation here of a baby giraffe. So I think we're going to call this a finished product here. I'll zoom in a little bit. You can see a little bit of that detail that I put in. But I'm pretty happy with the finished result here of this baby giraffe. So this will look nice in the nursery with the other ones for this commissioned request. Till next time, happy painting, everybody.